Okay, welcome everyone. This is the APAC EMEA orchestration demo on November 23rd. So we have nothing on the, oh no, here we go, well done. I was going to say we have nothing on the agenda. We have a late entry onto the agenda. Before we jump onto discussion points though, is there anything to demo?
Well, there is something that we can show, but it's not really demoable, which is something that I was toying with Graham as well, which is a bit tangential to his work on the release environment. So I can show this. I mean, it's 3 line of code, 3 line of CI, and it's an interesting idea. So let me do this. Here we go. So what I'm talking about, this is a Terraform project that we have on Ops only. And this was born as an attempt to basically create project mirrors for the security mirror, right? So you declare them, and with just very simple here. You just say these are the projects. So these are the projects that we generated with this instead of the old manual way, and you declare them and say where is the security namespace, the mirror, the dev namespace, the canonical path, and this will just do the magic. It will terraform the thing, create configure mirrorings and things like that. So this was an interesting idea, but then we started exploring more advanced CI things. So when this started, this was just deployed from Terraform from my computer and storing the state file on the Terraform state file on Ops, because it's a feature of the product. You can just have this as a central store. Then the next step was, we probably should do this in CI, right? We all know how things should work. And so the CI is deploying these changes. You can do the merge request and things like that. And what we are playing right now is this concept here of the deployment on the merge train. So this project it has all the features that we have. So it has merge request result pipeline, which we already use in all of our components, release tools included, but it also goes the extra mile and has merge train enabled, which means that when we hit the merge button, this is going to stack every merge request that we want to merge into the train, and so they will just build on top of the other changes that are already in the train. And they will run a special pipeline that can be identified with some variables. And this pipeline will, if the pipeline is green, this will become the new main branch. It will just be the same commit, same SHA, same information. It's not that this is going to be merged and generates a new commit. It's just giving you some sort of look ahead in the future. This is how main will look like if this pipeline completes. And so
that's interesting. So I didn't realize, sorry to interrupt, that merge trains don't give you a merge commit.
They give you a merge commit, but it's not on main yet. So if you ask what's my branch, is not main.
Main, right? Yeah.
So, but that's the interesting bit, which is, can we deploy on the merge train? Because something that we were trying to figure out is sometimes we merge something. We basically run some kind of dry run. In this case, it's Terraform, so it's a plan. So we run a dry run, which is a plan on the merge request. So we hope that this will apply, but then the deployment itself will run API calls. And those API calls may fail for other reasons. Maybe we don't have permission, and this thing doesn't surface on the plan and things like that. So the idea was, because something is merged, officially merged only after the merge train pipeline, if we deploy on the merge train, then main only represent what is actually being applied in production. I mean, in production in this sense. I mean, it has been applied to the live system. This applies to ops, dev, so this is just terraforming the thing. So that's what we're trying to do here. It's actually working, and it's very, very simple. So let me expand a bit more, or maybe this. It's going to be easier. So this project here is using child pipeline to protect the environment altogether, so that there's no way that you're going to run multiple deployment at the same time. And you can't even run the plan at the same time because they rely on the same state file, and this could be changed by another plan or deployment. So everything is sealed at the Terraform level. So we have, every time we interact with Terraform, it could be that we do plan or we do plan and deploy, but this is a trigger, is a trigger from a parent pipeline, and there is a lock, a resource group lock from the trigger. So that's what gives us the protection around this thing. But the interesting part is this, that's the plan, as I said. So this is just run every time. But this is the nice change that we have done here. So we run the deployment only if the merge request event type is the merge train. So we are on the merge train, and this is a candidate to be merged. And we no longer run the deployment on the main branch. We just need to, you need an extra variable if you actually want to run a deployment on the main branch, because you don't expect to run them. They will be already applied, the changes will be already applied by the merge train itself. So what happens here is that if for some reason the thing we thought were working do not apply, this will not commit them. And that's where we are with this. What we would like to go over as a next step is, in case of a failure, trigger a deployment from main that will revert to the system, because Terraform may fail, but when it failed, maybe he applied some of the changes because it's just running things in steps. So you give them as a security mirror is create me a project, fork me this project, set up mirror, create this push rules, create another mirror on dev. So it just gives you incremental steps, and maybe it fails later on. And so the idea worth exploring is, if this fail, we can have a job that only runs on failure, that is triggering the same pipeline on main with this Terraform apply variable provided as true, so that this will actually trigger another deployment from the old known state. And
kind of like a rollback.
Yeah, it's kind of a, yeah. Basically, it's keeping in sync the Git status with the environment status. Yeah, that's the thing.
And so then this is relevant to the release environment because so this would be large. This would give us a way of getting the commits onto the stable branch to merge train, right?
Yeah, this is kind of this is a fresh project which was easier to just toy with, but is kind of, can we push the type of workflow that we're using to more advanced CI feature, and then learning from this, how much of this can we backfeed in the things that we have or the new things that we are building? Because for change management, this looks really good. If let's say, okay, go ahead, Grims. Yeah.
Oh, no, you continue on.
Yeah, I was just going to say this final thing. If we are going to change Kate's workload to not work on variables, but just work on commits, this could be applied on Kate's workload as well. There will be more work because then we have to split by environments. There's extra stuff, but this could be applied to Kate workloads as well, and having changes stacking one on top of the other. So it's going to say this, there was an auto deploy, it was creating this. And then there was a configuration change that was changing this. And each one will have his own pipeline. And if something failed in between, the system will get back to its original state, and all the things on the train will just be removed. So you have to recreate the train and redecide what you want to apply in which order.
And what causes something to get actually properly fully merged? Is that's the pipeline has completed? Is that right? So it's like it's a timing thing, but essentially, right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
What I really love about this is it solves a huge problem we have with Terraform, Kubernetes, any infrastructure code environment, because the current process is this. You merge to master, you have a pipeline that tries to apply the changes. So the merge request is your intent, right? I'm intending to change this. I'm representing via Terraform or manifests or values, my intent to change something. But then we merge it, right? So it's merged to master. We have a pipeline to apply that. After it's merged to master, it fails. So now what's in Git doesn't match what's running. And this is just constant headaches, right? Because what happens is someone else, if you don't notice that, you got to Git revert it to kind of like, and do a merge request to revert it and get things back into sync. So when you don't do that, the next person comes along, merges theirs, and their commits on master, your commits on master, and now the deploy pipeline that they had is trying to apply both of your changes, and then it fails again, and then it spirals out. And the bigger the team, the bigger the complexity, the more people, the more geographically distributed the people are. It's a big problem. But this flips it on its head. You're doing the apply first. You're actually going to change the running state first. And it's only when that completes, that your pipeline is green, that it actually gets, okay, now I'm going to put this onto main, and reflect the state in Git is now accurate, because I've already done the pipeline to apply it. Whereas before it's merge to master, then try and apply it. Now it's let's try and apply it. Yes, that worked. Okay, now I'm going to actually merge it on master. And obviously you mentioned, Alessio, in that there's the one problem with Terraform, maybe not so much with Kubernetes, actually maybe with Kubernetes, is that revert process. It's like, okay, if something goes wrong, you might be in a half state. So you want to actually do something to go, okay, go back to what was good and make sure that is now applied. Make sure the good part is applied. And that in theory then gives us that true whatever's in Git is what is running in state. And therefore it's more hands-off. It's more guaranteed that when I intend to make a change, it will either be correct and it will go into master and everyone's happy, or it won't be correct and it will not go into master. And then anyone else's change is not affected by my change, which has already been done on master.
Awesome.
And the reason we've never really looked at this much is because merge trains won't work with mirroring. They won't work with the ops mirroring. So we've never had the ability to really look at this. And we probably, for some pipeline, any of our mirrored repos, it'll be incredibly difficult to actually pull this off without further changes to the product, I guess.
I also wonder, it'd be fascinating to actually try and gather some data around master. I wonder at what point we have the number of changes going into master, the length of the merge pipeline, and the percentage of failures. I wonder at what point you just would never ever apply anything. I don't know what that number would look like, but I feel like that's the reason merge pipelines are key, right?
That's the reason why we don't have this enabled in our public project. So it was tested on the www.gitlab.com project, and the rate of failure was too high. And because it removes everything from the merge train, it was really painful. That's why I think this is interesting for infrastructure changes, because they tend to be less frequent, and the people applying them tends to be more. In any case, they will take a look at the pipeline, because right now you know that it applies on after the merge, so you are already spending time looking at this. So there is, and then you have also things like change lock or change request. So there is already a process around this, and it's probably easier. And in theory, we don't know, pipeline should be a bit faster because you're not testing here, right? So the test happened before we were just applying something. And I mean, in a project like this is simple enough to be fast. Maybe a full GitLab deployment will take more time, but in any case, we're talking about production. So it's already failing today. So if those things are not working, we're already just working on to each other works, and it's a mess. So I think it's more valuable in this type of project than it is on, say, GitLab, the repo with all the tests. And I mean, if there were no flaky tests, there would be no problem. But yeah, there are.
Yeah, and I think you're right about the metrics. Like, it would be interesting. Do we get points of the day where the merge train becomes so big Like, because the amount of changes, if you hit the point where the train is growing, that's more people trying to move faster than your pipeline is letting them, right? Like and that's an interesting problem in itself.
The train can be partially applied. That's the important bit. So as soon as the pipeline completes, that section of the train is already applied.
Yeah.
The problem is only one failure, because the failure disbands the train. And so everything that is after that, it gets a merge failure, basically. They need to re-instantiate a new merge train and press the merge button again. And this will create a new train. So in theory, you have 10 changes. They will take 1 hour each. You would just have 10 pipelines, 1 hour each. If they can be parallel, they will run in parallel. If they have research group, they will just be one after each other. But as soon as something finish, that one is applied on master or main branch.
Yeah, it is an interesting. Would be interesting to see how that looked, because really, if you do get to the point where you are like, oh wow, our trains are constantly failing, they're kicking things out, it's quite disruptive. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's definitely a really good like analyzing the failures, I think becomes a very important point then. But yeah, I think it's got good implications for the independent deployment stuff, because if you're going to have more disparate groups, more disparate people trying to do changes, that queuing up and that keeping the state. So it's not like, oh, look, one team did this, their pipeline failed, everything is now a broken state and they've wandered off, and now everything else is trying to apply their change as well. And like, we can't baby that we're not going to be able to scale as a group by having to baby each group's pipeline. Like we currently, honestly, we have to with Kate's workloads and stuff today. Like even today, I had to fix the deployment pipeline and staging because Helm broke again and I had to clean it up and stuff. But we need to make them more like, yep, this is applied and this is now reflective in Git, and other people can now move on and do work, or we need everything rolled back cleanly and applied cleanly so that without intervention. Like that's the key, I guess.
Yeah, awesome. Alessio, do you mind just dropping that MR onto the agenda?
Yeah, sure, I will.
Awesome, thanks for that. Awesome. Great. Are there any other demo items, or should we jump to discussions? Nope. Okay, discussions. So Graham, over to you.
I'll try and keep this quick. So chatting with a few different people, and both in person and on issues, just trying to think about the epic that we currently have around the release environments work, which has uncovered some things we're going to need, right? And then the epic Myra has about the just policy extension, which is all similarly related, right? Like it's all kind of overlapping, and how do they fit together, or how can we logically fit them together? And starting to think about that more. And Alessio and Myra and myself had a few comments on there, but I think we're all on the same page, but just thought take a chance to discuss it. How do we actually see the pipelines on stable branches looking, and kind of break down a responsibility, and when things go wrong, what's going to happen? And I think, once again, this open to discussion. If I've got it wrong, certainly let me know. But I think what we kind of want to do is have the pipelines that run in the GitLab org GitLab repository. So on the stable branch, when you merge stable branch, those are kind of like our auto deploy pipelines. They're like our coordinated pipelines. And there's a couple of things we need to do in them, right, to make this all work how we expect it. We need to interface with distribution to build packages that we can deploy. And that's an area of investigation we need. At the moment, there's an issue in the release environments epic, but it might be worth splitting that out into its own epic if it's a lot of work. Hopefully it's not. Hopefully it's just triggering a downstream pipeline into distribution with some variables or whatever we need so that they can build packages from stable branches, not from tags, but just from a SHA, I guess, on a stable branch. So now that we've done that, and that's distributions kind of, we have to talk and interface with distribution to do that. The second part will be the deployment. So like in auto deploy, that's through deployer and Kate's workloads. But for this pipeline, this will be the one that actually triggers into release environments. The mechanism for doing that we're still not clear on, but I got some ideas about trying to like do it through merge requests and stuff, and maybe leverage the work that Alessio is doing in there. But at any rate, there needs to be some interface and trigger to actually deploy through the release environments, and it's most likely by committing a file with some version numbers, which in itself is a very interesting topic of conversation. But that repository, that release environments repository, the pipeline inside of it is only got a very simple job, which is check that the environment it's deploying to meets some base level of health. We could probably reuse the deployment health metrics. Applying the deploy, so Helm or whatever it needs to do, the actual Kubernetes biddly bops, and then checking again that the environment is still okay somehow. Probably maybe watch deployment health for a few minutes or something like that. I'm not quite sure. We'll figure that out. And then that pipeline returns, and so we're back now in that main GitLab or GitLab pipeline. And then the final step is QA. And once again, we've got Matt. Thank you, Matt, for working on that issue in the release environments epic. But realistically, I'm not sure if we want the release environments repo to concern itself with that. That could possibly be moved out into a different epic, or maybe up into the backport policy extension epic. But I think that needs to be triggered from that higher level. What I don't want is like this tree, I guess, like we're like, okay, we're going to do this release environment. So now it's going to trigger distribution. Now it's going to trigger QA as well. I think keeping things at the high level, from what I can think we've learned from auto deploy as well, with the release tools managing all of those more and being managed in the coordinated pipeline, gives us two things. It's less depth of pipelines, and when things break and the pipeline breaks, it's a very clear understanding about who is responsible or who can we talk to investigate the problem. If it's the trigger into the distribution, building the container pipeline or packages pipeline, then we know we need to work with distribution on why that failed. If it's into the release environments, then it's probably delivery team, SREs or something. And then if it's a QA trigger and QA fails, then we need to obviously interface with QA on fixing that. So any questions, concerns, or things that I've said that we don't agree with?
I think my I agree with all of that, Graham. My question, I think, is around how we link these two things up. So what the developer experience looks like, and how if once we have all these bits in place, like as a developer, I merge a change onto a stable branch. If the tests fail, how do I connect that back? Like, how will I know that's happened?
They get an email.
And will they so will the break, so do they break the stable branch? What would be the kind of level of failure?
Yeah, they will break the
stable branch is broken. Yeah.
And so there are a couple of information here. I don't remember if the email goes to the author or to the maintainer who merged. Probably the maintainer who merged. Many of us have they just dev know directly gitlab.com emails. That's another problem, but we can build on top of that. I think this is more in the realm of the issue about working with the stable security, the stable branch broken branch workflow, which is more about surfacing those type of error and just having quick reaction. But I think the key bits here is that it is easier to attribute the failure for many reasons. So every single merge request, we're not talking about thousands of merge requests, right? So that's the tricky part here. This is it's a finite small numbers. So every one of them will have in the merge request page the widget showing the merge result. So the first pipeline that runs as the result of that merge is in there. Will be the red dot showing, yeah, this is the one that failed, and it's kind of an indication already in the right place. The breakdown that Graham suggested is great because it gives you, on the top level, you will have triggers and it clearly identifies where the things are broken. So who you should talk to try to figure things out at that level. And there is another thing that I think is important is, and I don't remember. Jesus, I wanted to say something. Triggering single level. Yeah, I will came back. So I don't. But I like the way it's broken down, and so the two things together should give us a good way for react to this, aided by self-awareness of the maintainer, author, or by the process kicking in and fixing the problem. Oh yeah, that's the third thing. Sorry, I'm back on my thoughts. So because we're talking about triggers here, this may, and we're talking about slow, not many changes. We may also consider if and where we want to place resource group locks. So I'm thinking maybe we want to deploy and QA one by one, but definitely don't want to package one by one because packaging takes time. So probably we want to go ahead and start packaging everything in parallel, assuming dev can handle the load, I guess. So there's also an interesting question, like, do we want to just create CNG images at that stage?
That's what I'm thinking to start with, just because that's all we're going to be using.
So we save time,
that,
And maybe nightly we build the full package so that we know that also Omnibus is okay. So there are extra things we can work around, right? But probably we can also do CNG all in parallel. Then we do deployment with resource lock because you want to deploy once at a time, and probably have deployment and QA in the same resource lock, so that even though it's on the top level, so we're not increasing the nesting too much, we are trying to bundle those two operations.
So no one is running
in the same lock. So that there's no way that another deployment can kick in and prevent you from running the QA on the environment. So it's still one by one, each one gets its own thing. And then maybe at the end, after all of this, you also build Omnibus. Because if you can't build Omnibus, it's another data point. So something has to be fixed. So they change themselves are good, but a package, you can't produce a package. So it's another interesting point.
That's a good point. We should build both. Like the effort is to make it so that we know that the stable branch can be released at any point in time, and we know Omnibus is a key part of that. So we should do both, even if we don't necessarily use them. Yeah. I think we can certainly obviously add things to the pipeline like Slack triggers and things like that if pipelines break. And
someone is ringing at the doorbell. I'll be back soon. Sorry.
The user experience we can definitely improve, but at the end of the day, it is basically all this comes down to is a broken pipeline. And so the experience for developers will be seeing a broken pipeline with some jobs that got the red X. And I did like your thought, Amy, on I'm just thinking in general, it'd be nice if GitLab, the product, gave us a way to give more description to some CI tasks, like, oh, you see this CI task has failed, you mouse over it and we can put a note, you should probably go to this Slack channel and ask for help or something like I don't know. I guess, you could do it in the job output maybe, and maybe that's something we can consider as well. But really trying to make it easily discoverable that, when they get the email, they click on the thing. Obviously, the first thing they're going to do is find the X, click on the X, the job comes up, and then it's almost immediately right in front of them to just get them started. Not even having to go to the handbook and be like, oh, if your pipeline fails in this step, that's something we should look at doing in general, is really trying to surface those kind of responses into our jobs somehow.
I wonder if we could almost, this is just pure but I wonder if there's almost something we could do on the MR template. I wonder if there's something we could put on the actual MR, just like if you're doing a bug fix on a patch, have some extra or something. But yeah, I agree. We should make it easy to find stuff.
Probably we can do this with I think it's Ops Triage, the tool that we're using. Yeah,
that's true.
Because it's more live, right? So we can, the description stays there and not even the author look at them. But if some bots or something is comment, it's a new message on your thing.
That's a good idea.
What's happening here, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it could just be the on failure. It puts a comment back on the merge request that says, "Hi, this has failed and it's now broken a stable branch. It broke at stage this. This is the team you might want to consider reaching out to for assistance."
Yeah, something like that would certainly be good. What about permissions?
They'll get an email from the comment, and
So as we pass around on the sort of the pipeline, like how much control will we have over the permissions? I'm kind of thinking like we wouldn't probably just want, I mean, it's not super dangerous, but we probably just wouldn't want everybody being able to run that deploy job. But at the same time, we do want everybody to be able to see the QA jobs, for example. Like, we may not have a solution, but I'm kind of wondering, like, is this another problem we actually need to figure out the permissions and where things live?
I believe so. I believe we're going to have a look and understand pipeline permissions. I think you're right. We need to understand it, right? Because we see it with the auto deploy pipeline now, and it's like people retrying jobs downstream, how that affects things. We will need to continue to have an understanding of that, right? Because let's say a job goes, let's talk through the 3 sections, right? So it goes into distribution and they're like, please create packages. Once again, does that mean we want every developer have the permissions in distributions repos? They might already have it.
They already have.
Check that. Okay, well, that's fine.
Just if you can run a pipeline with variables, you can get a package out of it.
Okay. So yeah, how we do that for the deploy pipeline, we'll have to examine that. And then once again, how QA, I think QA is fine because once again, we just give every developer the ability to run QA pipelines, I assume so.
I don't remember.
Yeah. Okay. We'll have to figure that out and make sure, because we're still at this, correct me if I'm wrong, we're still at the state where there's no way you can say trigger a downstream pipeline and delegate it to different permissions. You are locked into whoever. Yeah. Okay, cool. So
yeah, I mean, this is not entirely true. So caveats here. You can trigger a downstream pipeline using a deploy trigger. A pipeline trigger. It's a completely different beast, same API, different token. In that case, they will not belong to the user, but they will belong to the trigger. And I don't remember what level of permission you can set on those triggers. That being said, QA runs from ops. So there's another point here. Do we want to have a release environment, QA, mirror, whatever on .com so that we can trigger and do the regular child pipeline thing? I mean, this is an interesting thing, right? 'Cause if we package from dev, so that's already
we're already going across boundary. Yeah.
So those things are interesting to analyze a bit more. I would say that as a general line, if you are allowed to merge on a stable branches, because of what we are describing, you should be allowed to deploy on release environments.
Exactly. Yeah.
It should be the same settings, because the release environment has only one task, which is allowing you to push that value there, right? So the versions you want to deploy. Probably we don't want to have, I'm just guesswork here. Maybe we want to segregate configuration out of that, right? So that the thing that they can do is changing versions. But if we want to change the configuration of the environment, this is a SRE/delivery task and maybe belongs somewhere else.
Well, that's why I was hoping the interface into the release environments would be either using the Git API to commit a file or possibly even tracking a whole merge request, because then I can use code owners. So I can say the versions go in one file, code owners is everyone at GitLab or
maintain developers, backend developers, front-end developers.
Configuration files, their code owners is someone else, and then it's all built into GitLab, and we just, it's all handled. So I think it's possible, but you're right. We'll have to scope that out. And I guess we'll have to start we'll do some dry tests with like people with different permissions and break things and see what happens. But I think it's all achievable. We just need to figure it out.
Nice. Are there any actions we want to take? I know there's kind of a lot of like things we should be aware of and kind of like will play out as we build, but is there anything specific we actually want to capture from this chat?
So the only thing that jumps to my mind thinking about it now and looking for ways we can like get more things happening in parallel and if needed is the task. So in the release environments epic, I do have a task like we need to figure out if we can build stuff on stable branches, right, by delivery, right? If we're in agreement that should happen up on the stable branch pipeline, maybe that should come out of that epic either into a separate epic or a separate issue or a task off the. I mean, it can stay in that epic. I guess it doesn't really matter, but it's not if we're saying that packaging is not happening in the release environments repo, which it's not. It's going to happen in the GitLab org repo. I guess we can keep it there. Where the epic where it lives is probably irrelevant, but that work can be done now. And what I mean by that is we could even get stable branches packaging today, even if we don't use them, right? Like we could get that job running now. So even right now, we're starting to package stuff on stable branches. Like we don't need to wait for anything else to be done.
Isn't this already there? I mean, you did investigation.
Maybe it is.
So when we do the QA and package thing, what's the review apps implementation?
Mm-hmm.
So how does the review app implementation build the package, and is that a suitable package to our need, or is a very say kind of an omnibus in Docker type of installation, which is not what we need?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. I guess that's what I'm kind of getting at is I've got it on a to-do, but I'm thinking out loud now that I could bring that forward, maybe as the next priority. And then if it's like, oh yes, this is good, we know how to do this, this is easy, actually, if it's already been done in a way that's consumable by us, we can just tick it off. We can say, yep, it's already been done, we're getting packages that are suitable. If it's not, then we should be like, okay, we need to do whatever the work is and get that happening in stable branches now. Even if, we got other work to try and get the release environments ready, we can still just start packaging, get the packages going. Because that's the first thing. I can't deploy to them unless I have packages. So I might bring that. I mean, this is just an action item, I guess, for myself. I'll try and bring that task forward. If I do think it's going to become big, I might split that into an epic. Like if it's like, okay, we need to do a bunch of work and it's gonna, it's gonna be bigger than just something easy. Then maybe we split that into an epic and actually make an epic around getting stable branches packaged properly in the way we need. Hopefully it's not. But I can take a look at that.
Awesome. That'd be good. Because I think if we do need anything from distribution, we should probably let them know.
Get it? Soon. Yes, exactly.
It's pretty busy. I know there's a reasonable number of issues kind of outstanding on the developer tooling pieces that Myra and Steve are working on. But just in general kind of terms of how these things are moving along in parallel, does it feel like we will be in a position sorry, I assume it will be at some point in January that the sort of the developer tool pieces will end up being kind of available for use. So that's just an assumption based on what I've seen so far. But do we think that we will be able to just go ahead with the maintenance policy work then, or do we need to keep this environment epic running kind of at a similar pace?
So just to understand, are you saying this release environment stuff is like, is it a blocker for continuing?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I do think, is this
gotcha.
still going to be a blocker for enabling the maintenance policy work, assuming we have, well, probably not even this packaging stuff, right? Because assuming we have all the developer tooling and, like there is a way to tag and prepare and got the blog posts and things. Where are we thinking? I know we originally talked about, like, is there another permanently alive environment that the packages go on to be tested? Do we decide that we're going to not do that for now, or run that in parallel, or where are we sort of thinking for the testing?
I think we can definitely we'll just have to make the call as timing lays out. I'm hoping this environment work won't be taking me too much longer. Do we have anything we could substitute? We don't right now. We could probably find, like, we could always spin something up by hand, or, copy and paste pre or something like that if we really wanted to, although it's arguably just as much effort than continuing with the work we've got. Correct me if I'm wrong, but by not having release environments, we're not necessarily in a worse state than we are now. So I guess that means it's not really a blocker, right? Like, we're not going backwards, we're just not quite as forwards as we would like. So I think it's okay to just continue on, or it's not necessarily like, no, we can't, we have to block this on these environments being ready, simply because at the moment we don't have them anyway. Like, we've got nothing. We're aiming to have something better than nothing, so it's probably okay. But I personally don't know enough about it all end to end to make that call.
So I was starting with the same thinking as your, Graham. So saying, yeah, when today we do something like this, we don't have the release environment for the old one, even for the security releases, right? So we only test one. However, now that you were thinking, a couple of key points came to my mind. One is, we often do this for security, and security builds and releases are tested by APAC individually. So there is a manual QA process that is happening, which will not be here, point one. Point two, which is probably more concerning, is that dedicated runs on the previous minor. So we are going to increase the number of releases for them, and this is going to affect them.
Yeah, it does put their stability, not stability, but it puts them in, they're taking an element of risk. Yeah.
I mean, it's all to discuss, it's all to wait and figure out what we want to do here, right? It's just a data point that came to my mind when we were discussing. And yeah, the release environment will still be there. So the regular one, the current minor will be as tested as it is today. The other one will be more risky.
Yeah, I wonder how much extra risk we add by the fact that more changes will be in the essentially not so tested packages. Because at the moment, there's like 1 or 2 changes. I mean, it doesn't necessarily make more risk, but I guess it could, right?
When we do this today with the exception request, do we have QA engineers that are just running manual tests on them?
I think we must have something. I feel like I don't really have a good handle. Maybe that would be a good action for us to quiz Ruben, who I think has the best insight into what we are actually able to test. I know Ruben has like a way of running various tests, but at the same time, I do know there are also things that we go to quality and we basically ask them, like, is it going to be okay if we're in this state? So I don't know what quality does at that stage. So that could be a good action. I wonder if I'm trying to think. I know we've talked about this before in issues, and I feel like I don't really have a full picture of like exactly what's going on in there. Okay, let's have a think about that. Like, because I think that one would probably be a good one to understand, because if we can get close at least to the existing process, and we just know, like, we don't have to decide right now. Right? I think this is a bit of as we get further down with the project, like, do we reach a point where we're kind of like, we do need to wait for all the pieces to be in place, or are there workarounds? It would probably be good for us to know at that point whether there's actually a manual process or something we could put in place to make it safe enough that we just go ahead, or whether actually we do want to keep these two things running quite closely tied together. Cool. Okay, let's keep that one in mind. I think that one will be a little bit like, I don't want to generate unnecessary work. I think it's absolutely fine for now. We won't need it this year, I very much doubt. So we can just keep that one in mind. But yeah, Alessio makes a great point about dedicated.
Yeah. And I don't think that's going to change, right?
No,
like
that's not
they
deliberately.
Yeah,
exactly. I think that's fine. I think it does just make the testing, particularly of that version, a bit more interesting than it currently is. One other thing, Graham, I was thinking about is as we merge in security fixes. So when we launch this sort of maintenance policy extension, there will be two processes essentially running, right? And so patch release things will just get merged in by the developers, relatively low numbers. Security release will run as existing, and release managers will do the sort of bulk merge.
This kind of,
How will that backport merge from the release managers affect the release environments? Should we be thinking of having some way of not allowing that to happen, or?
So good question. And I've got an open issue there to discuss security of the release environments in general. Because in some ways they're good in that they'll be almost empty. There was not going to be any data. Like there's no data, like the data levels, red data. There's no like they're empty environments. They're worthless. But interestingly enough, you're right. I did think like they haven't got data that is interesting, but they will have code that is interesting. Because at the moment, yes, absolutely, you would merge the security in, they would go to the release environments, we'd test, deploy, and what have you. In theory, that should be fine, because those environments should really only be accessible and usable by people at GitLab, and we should make sure they're secure enough to do that. And obviously, I want to work with security on making sure that's the case. If for whatever reason we can't get a technical solution where that is in place and we can't trust them, I think then what we want to do is something like on the merge requests that are security, we can put a label on the merge request, put an MR and a tech, like a skip deploy tag in the commit. We've got some mechanisms in GitLab CI where we can say, actually, we're not going to trigger a downstream pipeline deploy because of this. We'll just skip that. We'll skip the QA. We'll skip we might do something different based off that. So it'll really just come down to what we feel the security of those environments, and 100% we're going to need to sign off whatever we choose to do. We need security involved because they are essentially now new tracked environments that we will need to consider around that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it'll be certainly interesting to see how how useful they end up being, because I guess one of the other big differences is the time frame. So security release is like within this 2-hour window, here are 20 MRs or something like that, which will be probably very different from patch releases. So that will be interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think too, in the future, if we do like the merge, if we get to a spot where we can be like, you just merge the security features, the security fixes onto the stable branches as needed, and we'll just tag later on. And we can deploy them. It does open up a lot of interesting opportunities, because not only are we QEAing them, we're now having them deployed somewhere where people could conceivably log it, like a developer or a security person could log into those release environments and go, yes, I've tried to attack it with the vulnerability, it's fixed. It inspires that more confidence, but I do agree that those intricacies of that we're not quite ready for yet. But we'll address that in time. Possibly, I think for MVP, I'm not against just saying we'll just close the scope and just say, we will come up with a mechanism so that anything merged via security release process, hopefully in that automation that maybe does the merging or something. We'll figure out something where we will just,
they must
we might
have
just
labels already. Like we could skip. They have so much process on them. So yeah.
We'll just do something like, no, we're just going to skip them for the moment.
Yeah,
and
makes sense.
Push it out later.
Cool. Yeah.
And that means, how will that work though? Because then the next person who deploys, like just merges a normal patch release will now get the security release. So that's probably okay because we're merging tagging and releasing to the public straight away or very close together, right? So I don't think it's a big issue, but we do have to be careful that once you do merge on the stable branch, anyone else who comes along after is going to get your code as well. So
yes. Yeah.
I mean, the other option is we do something. It really depends on that time. I don't have enough kind of understanding of that timing, but I think if the timing's short enough, then it's probably not a big deal to just skip, do the tag, get the release out, make it public, and then obviously the next merge request that goes on to maybe we have to lock deployments while we do. Maybe that's the thing. We already know we have to lock certain things around security. Maybe when we're like, okay, I've got to do the security release process, we kind of just lock that whole situation and be like, this is locking that for the moment. So we can get it all done. Okay, it's public. We can unlock it, and then things can continue on.
Do you know that's interesting? Because Myra and I chatted briefly the other week about whether there is a risk. So right before you, so you could merge in all of the security backports, and then right before you get a chance to do the tag, somebody could merge in a patch fix and break.
Oh, true. Yeah.
And we didn't really come away with like any kind of like, but it's certainly, that's also another, it adds a risk into the security release.
I think the merge trains solve that, right? We can just put a job in the merge trains where check some flag. We have some flag where like we have some source where we can just say things are locked, security release going on. We have the merge train, it goes oh, it's security release going on. My pipeline fails, merge train fails, developer gets kicked out and said, hey, you've got to kick off the merge train again. It failed because we said we're in a security release and you're locked out. That might be the simplest thing.
Yeah.
A bit ugly, but at least the end result is their commit is not now committed to the branch.
Yeah. Okay, let me catch up with Myra again later, because I think that would be a good one to get onto the maintenance policy. That feels very much like developer tooling. How do we manage the influx of changes, and how does a developer like understand what's happening? So let me chat with Myra and see what she wants to do with that one. But I mean, it probably isn't a disaster if we don't have it for this iteration. We can just see how it goes, but it does feel like there's some
it's definitely it's a little gap that we
yeah. Cool. Okay.
Starting to think about anyone doing anything at any point in time, not just us, is we're gonna have a lot of these little problems.
Exactly. That's it. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Great stuff. Final couple of minutes. Well, probably actually over time based on how speedy meetings work. Is there anything else anyone wants to cover on this demo? Nope. Okay. Well, thank you very much for the chance. And shout if you do need any help. Otherwise, we'll catch up on issues.